Moving on. It's been a privilege listening to all these meticulous, learned, insightful views about antinatalism that our little book has partly inspired. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, Tejas, Karim, Lawrence, Patricia, and everybody who provided comments and endorsements. Now, however, for something slightly different. The book was, after all, written almost a year ago, and a philosopher's head cannot stay in one place for that long without exploding. At least not this philosopher's head, as you can see in the photographic evidence here. So it's time to take count of some of the things that we might do differently if we started our work now. I have three main things in mind, and without further ado, let me just start with the first of them. And it is the interpretation of Silenus and his wisdom, or wisdom in scare quotes, as the case may be. Let's see. In Greek mythology, Silenus, as you'll remember, was the mentor and companion of Dionysus, the god of wine. He had prophetic skills, but he only used them under duress. Someone had to force him to do so. And this was best done when he was hung over after one of his frequent orgies. King Midas, the one who turned everything into gold by his touch, asked on one of these occasions what would be best for people. And after the usual hesitation, Silenus responded that it would be best not to be born at all, and if you are, the second best would be to live life as soon as possible. But what's the meaning of this? The anti-natalist community has hailed it as a statement against reproduction and possibly for pro-mortalism, and that's what we sort of did in the book as well. But it's not that simple, is it? We don't even know who's talking, let alone what they are talking about. We could be talking about this Silenus, a noble figure sculpted around 300 BCE. He could be a trustworthy source of wisdom. But would he be promoting anti-natalism? He is, after all, holding baby Dionysus in his arms with an expression that very much looks like fatherly pride. Or we could be talking about this more common figure of Silenus, the repulsive pot-bellied drunk gorging on earthly pleasures. He could, in the harsh light of the morning, well say morbid things about human life. But would anyone listen to him? Did Sophocles, who depicted Silenus in his play, even mean him to be listened to? Or was it just a warning against hedonism? Pleasure doesn't give life any meaning. We don't really know. We can be philosophical about it and resort to Nietzsche's The Birth of Tragedy. He argued there that there are two main forces in life, Apollonian reason and order and Dionysian passion and chaos. The ancient Greeks, according to Nietzsche, were the last ones to keep these in proper balance. Both versions of Silenus could have coexisted in the Nietzschean world, somehow mystically conjoined. Again, we don't really know what that would mean, except that with the noble, rational Apollonian figure in attendance, the crudest forms of hedonism and anti-hedonism would probably be gone. And this could have further implications. Nietzsche also said that the Greeks knew the terrors and horrors of existence, but covered them with a veil in order to be able to live. So the question then is, what terrors? What horrors? What's the veil? In the book we argued that the veil, whatever it originally was, later on developed into what we now know as European moral philosophy, which is mainly a series of counter-arguments to anti-natalism. And that was quite clever of us. Only, who cares? Philosophers are peculiar anyway. Why on earth would anyone be interested? And the question of the terrors and the horrors remains. What are they? And this leads to my second observation. We tend to speak about suffering, and its most understandable form is physical pain. Prompted a little, we can specify that mental anguish is also included. In the book, we even talk about an irredeemable sense of helplessness, which is a pretty abstract variant of suffering. Still a felt, undesirable experience, of course. But then comes the inevitable dialogue with a pro-natalist who says that pain and anguish are nothing too horrible. They are just inevitable integral parts of human life. Life is still good and to be cherished. And to say otherwise is just to make too much of it. We can for our part question the value of lives that are inevitably ridden with pain and anguish. And we can question giving such lives to innocent, as of yet not even existing individuals. But when people just don't have the imagination or sensitivity to see the wrongness of creating vulnerability and suffering, there's not much else that we can say or do. And apart from the pro-natalist lack of compassion, we also have to face our own internal criticism. If our starting point in a Nietzschean fashion is terror and horror, then simple pain and anguish don't seem to rise to the right level. They are bad, but not necessarily horrible enough. Which means that we may have been doing in the book too little, too late, or too much too soon, as the case may be, and our emphasis may have been wrongly placed. That's what you get when you allow two negative utilitarian extinctionists to write a treatise on antinatalism. Then again, we do present a newish argument from risk or something similar in there, so surely that must count for something. In the argument, we grant the pro-natalist that they may be lucky enough to have a child with a relatively good life. And we grant that their luck may last for generations on end. But then we note that, given time, if the family line continues indefinitely, the luck will eventually run out. There will, at some point in the future, be an individual with a life filled with terror and horror, however you choose to define them. And that's how every reproducer creates their own omelas. There will be a child, hungry, afraid and alone in the cold and in the dark, and that child will pay for all the happiness that you and all others in your family line enjoyed. And then the reproducers start drawing the curtains again. It's only fiction, not real life, they say. It will never happen in my family, they say. Nobody can make plans that far in the future, they say. Besides, suffering will be removed in time, they say. What's my point here? Well, it is that they, and they are the overwhelming majority, don't believe that everybody suffers. They do know that everybody can suffer, but as a rule, they don't care. And they do not get the omelas point, not really. They are willing to sacrifice the one or the few for the sake of the many, at least when they are themselves included in the many. In sum, the low quality of human lives, as detailed by David Benatar and endlessly repeated by the rest of us, does not move them in any way. Which means that we need a new, at least complementary point. And this brings me to my third observation. It takes the form of a statement. No one should have to be anyone else's child. Let me approach this by first telling you what I think children's attitude towards their parents should be. And here goes. Do not honor thy parents. This is the main rule, and it may sound harsh, so some caveats are in order. You can like them if you find them likable. There's no rule against that. You can respect them like anyone else if they have earned your respect. Some of them sometimes have. And you can even obey them, follow their rules, observe their prohibitions and commands, if that seems useful. But honor is not their due. They have done nothing to earn that. They have had sex, given birth to you without your consent, and maybe taken care of you, as they should. No honor, just doing their duty after their initial violation. But of course, all this is talking to a brick wall. Because there are greater forces at play. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long, says the holy book of some of the world's most influential religions. and one of them at least specifies the meaning of this general commandment by noting that whoever reviles his father or mother must surely die, the silent assumption being that not honoring reviles. To which the Church of Matti has this to say, the first words of his Holy Scripture. In the beginning, breeders created God in their own image. But what would the opposite or alternative to honoring thy parents be? I already conceded that they can be liked, respected, even obeyed without further damage. In my military days we had a poster on the office wall saying this: "You don't have to be mad to work here, but it helps." Along those lines something like this pops in mind. You don't have to hate your parents to be an anti-natalist, but it sure helps. Observe the question mark. This as such is not anything to go by, but it might be illuminating to consider some variations of it. Hate as such is a non-starter here. I've learned to know that it's far too frightening for many anti-natalists even to contemplate. If they declare something like that, they are, in their own eyes, bad people. To be fair, in the eyes of many others too. And apart from being bad, they would also be considered mentally ill. I googled "hate thy parents", and all the hits were about how to cure children from this disease of thinking ill of their mothers or fathers. There was no room for the feeling to be real, or an adequate response to a bad situation. So we don't want to go there. That's giving ammunition to pro-natalists. Instead, we can present a more comprehensive list of filial attitudes. These are just examples in something like this order: honor, love, like, respect, comply, endure, dislike, despise, and disobey. Then their relation to antinatalism. Can we find correlations here? It would be a matter for empirical scientists to investigate, but I can make a couple of educated guesses. The first is a standard distribution model that I believe could be favored by antinatalists who focus on the elimination of suffering. By emphasizing the respect, comply, endure dimension, they can concentrate on the impersonal and avoid accusing their own parents of wrongdoing. The leading example is David Benata, who dedicated Better Never to Have Been to his parents, even though they brought him into existence. I knew his father and mother quite well at the time of the publication of the book, and prouder parents you couldn't find. But curves can be drawn in other ways. For instance, to illustrate my more choleric take on anti-natalism at its purest. For me, honor, love, and even like are unnecessary hindrances. How can you recommend people not to have children and yet condone your own parents' offense? And to avoid any unnecessary bursts of emotion, the attitude can be verbalized quite neutrally. As to my parents, I consider them disagreeable persons with whom I don't want to have anything to do. Not to leave you with this madness, though, there is of course one more obvious alternative. The noble antinatalist, marked by nothing but filial respect and awe, yet moved by the world's suffering to remain childless, maybe reluctantly. Be that as it may, I promise to consider 3 ways to move forward. They were Silenus and his wisdom. How should we interpret ancient sources? Is suffering enough, or do we need something more terrible or horrible? And could that extra be found in the burden of having to honor thy parents, or at least pretend that you do? With those observations, moving on.